So we finally got the Pure Drive 98, and I was thinking maybe a full review, but it's probably a little bit past that time. So I started thinking, why not compare it to another Babolat racket, another very good one, the Pure Aero 98. Hey everybody, it's Luca from Rackets and Runners. So obviously the Aero 98 has gained a lot of hype over the past year. So many top young pros are using it, and it's also a very good update from the VS, so I'm always looking for some excuse to talk about it. I think comparing it to the Pure Drive 98 is actually kind of perfect because the two are very similar in specs, but actually quite different when you take them out to the court, and those differences all come down to subtle design intricacies, and you all know how much I love that type of stuff. I also just wanted to say thank you so much for all the kind comments on the Q&A and giveaway video. Congratulations to Chris for winning a VCore 98, and I also realized I have to come up with more creative ways to ask for subscribers. I wish we could give away a racket every video, but obviously that's not possible, so for this one I'm just going to say please subscribe. It's very much appreciated. Now of course, let me remind you that any of the rackets we talk about here you can check out on our website racketsandrunners.ca. I'm not going to ask you to subscribe again, but please do like the video, and don't forget to follow the store's Instagram and my personal one as well. Now back to these two rackets. Like I said, the specs are very similar. They both weigh 305 grams, they both have 98 square inch head sizes. Now the Aero has a 16 by 20 string pattern, whereas the Pure Drive's is a 16-19. Now the Pure Drive is also quite a bit stiffer, coming in at 69 RA strung, and the Pure Aero is 66. Makes sense, this is a power racket, it should be stiffer, but that is pretty high. Then you've got the beam thicknesses, and they both start at 21, then thicken up to 23. The only difference is that the Pure Drive goes back down to 21 and the Aero only to 22 in the throat. So yeah, similar beam thicknesses, but obviously very different beam designs. The Pure Drive looks pretty standard for a power racket, but obviously the Aero has that classic Babolat aerodynamic throat, and that right there is the genesis for all the differences between these rackets. Now I do want to say there are a lot of similarities between these two rackets. They're good and not so good at a lot of the same things, but playing them side by side, they do accomplish that in very different ways, and that's so obvious with spin. That's because the Pure Drive 98 is a very spin-friendly racket, one of the most spin-friendly mid-plus frames out there, and yet it really can't hold a candle to the amount of spin you can get with the Aero 98. The Pure Drive can produce a lot of spin because it's very stiff, it has an open string pattern, and it is pretty quick through the air. It's the type of racket where you'll never feel really limited with the amount of spin you can produce, especially if you compare it to more traditional 98s, but there's just something so much more addictive about hitting spin with the Aero 98. For one, that aerodynamic throat, I say this every time, but this is really something special from Babolat. The fact that they've barely had to tweak this for almost 20 years tells you everything you need to know, but combining it with the 98 square inch head size makes for a racket that is so whippy, you can brush up ridiculously quick through contact with this thing. There's really no other racket right now that I feel so much minute control over the racket face with. It's super unique in its swing pattern and swing speed, and I think that's why all these young pros with massive forehands like it so much. It's not just the swing pattern though that makes it more spin friendly than the Pure Drive. You also feel more spin potential from the string bed itself. In terms of actual string pattern density, the two rackets are quite similar, but you still get more string movement on the Aero, for one because of the spin grommets, but also because of the way the racket flexes. The Pure Drive has a very instantly responsive pop to it where the ball doesn't spend much time in the string bed, so it doesn't lose any spin during dwell time, but it also doesn't amplify it much either. On the Aero, you get this very unique pocketing where the ball sinks into the string bed, loads up on spin, then springs out with a few more RPMs. I consistently felt, especially on my forehand, that my ball had a little more arc and dip to it with the Aero. I also generally felt a little more control over the amount of spin I could produce because of that unique flex. It's a super cool sensation, and honestly, it's a racket that complements the modern stroke so well because yeah, it's extremely spin friendly, but then also that spin doesn't feel like it comes at the expense of very much control and solidity. What's really crazy about the Aero 98 is that it produces so much spin, and yet, unlike rackets like the Extreme MP or even older Aeros, you don't get a feeling of randomness from the string bed. That randomness usually comes if a string bed is too open or there's too much spin technology, but all that spin stuff here is tame and it feels more complementary to proper technique rather than really in your face and overpowering. I also think that adding that 20th cross on the Aero is quite important for toning down that launch, because comparing the launch angles of the Aero in Pure Drive 98, it is noticeably lower on the Aero. It's not like it's a super low launch angle because you do need a bit of launch to get that purchase over the ball for spin. But with the Pure Drive, I do feel like I need to be a little more careful with my shots, otherwise the ball can go flying a bit. Also, the fact that this is less spin friendly doesn't really help with control in that sense. A little more arc on the ball always made me feel more confident that it would land between the lines. Now, what I just talked about is control in the confidence-inducing sense, which is very important in a racket because that's what's going to let you feel free and loose. But now let's talk a little bit more about inherent control. Neither of these two rackets are very inherently controlled. If you do try to hit more methodical, flat, directional control shots, you will feel like something is lacking. It's what you should expect from rackets with this beam profile and stiffness. If you do want that type of control, go for something softer with a constant beam, maybe even a tighter string pattern. With that said, the Aero 98 does feel a bit more precise than the Pure Drive. The sweet spot is smaller, which means it's more well-defined when you do find it, but that also means the racket is a bit more punishing. The Pure Drive will help you out a little more when you do make imperfect contact, because even though it's a 98, it still has that classic power racket forgiving side to it. That's one of the things that has made the Pure Drive 100 such a mega popular racket over the years. You're not going to get all of that user friendliness here, but it does still have a lot of that Pure Drive DNA. Speaking of Pure Drive DNA, we all know that power is where Pure Drives make their names, and my goodness, that is absolutely the case on the Pure Drive 98. I can confidently say that this is the most powerful 98 square inch racket I've ever play tested. Nothing even comes close, not the Aero 98, not the E-Zone, and not even the current V-Core 98. The amount of power you can generate is more along the lines of 100 square inch power rackets, where you can just get ridiculous depth with very little effort. In stock form, it almost feels like a toy where you can just swat at the ball and it'll thunder off the string bed no matter what. I was actually abusing this a little too much to the point where my technique was going away and I was losing control of the ball, so I had to make some customizations to slow the racket down a little bit. My demo was swinging at 315 strung, which was really fun for sure, but I did feel like I needed a little more stability to back that crazy power, so I added a leather grip and a bit of lead at 12 o'clock. There, that's the lead in case you couldn't see it on that shot. I would recommend static weight up to 310, swing weight to at least the low 320s, and then you have yourself a rocket launcher that also has the stability you want from something with this head size. Dialed into those weight specs, this racket has one of the most unique power profiles out there. It may not be as forgiving as 100 square inch power rackets, but it's far more rewarding. I know I did just say it's less precise than the Aero 98, but it is still more precise than other rackets that are this powerful. You want to use that power and precision to its fullest potential, and the best way to do that is to take the ball on a little early, maybe even on the rise, and dictate play with flatter, more powerful ground strokes. You don't have to go for winners every time, but take control of the rallies with more penetrative shots. It really is a hybrid control and power racket where it has the solidity and stability of a 98 with that extra little bit of oomph you can only get with a true power racket. Also, as you can probably guess with a racket that's good for hitting with flat power, this thing can hit absolute bombs on first serves. Good serves are a lot about technique, but having something like this can certainly help. Now, the Aero 98 can absolutely hit with power, but you're not going to get the same ridiculous crackle off the string bed like you will with the Pure Drive. It's less addictive for those flatter, more powerful shots. This really is a racket you want to hit spin with, and spin is always going to take away a bit of power. At least that deadly laser-like power. It is actually pretty funny to say this because this is still easily in the top 3 most powerful 98s along with the V-Core, but the Pure Drive really is in a league of its own in that regard. I would also recommend, again, at least a leather grip here for the same reason, stability. Adding that to both these rackets is kind of the magical solid ingredient that perfectly complements their power. Now, I am going to tell you guys the truth. Throughout the course of my playtest, I was able to hit consistently more powerful shots with the Aero 98, but that's only because this racket complements my game a little bit better and I feel more confident with it. But if you do like that flatter power, there's no denying that the Pure Drive is better. So these are two great rackets, no question about it, but they are far from traditional both in their feel and their comfort. Usually, one of the benefits you get if you go for a 98 is that they have really good comfort because they're generally thinner and softer frames. Well, these are pretty thin, but they are very stiff, especially the Pure Drive, and the undulating beam makes them feel more firm than constant beam rackets. The Pure Drive 98 is teetering on what I would call an uncomfortable racket. I've never flat out said that about a racket yet, but you do need to be careful here, especially if you have a history of discomfort. I would probably just stay away. I wouldn't even say string it low with a soft poly to compensate for that stiffness, because you're going to want a pretty controlled string setup to help reel in that power. The Aero is a lot more comfortable, but I would still be careful, and this is where that extra weight can be really beneficial because it also helps take away a bit of the brunt of the contact. It does also have better feel than the Pure Drive. This one has NF2 Tech flak inserts, whereas the Pure Drive doesn't. That'll probably come with the next one, but for now there's a more plush and connected feel on the Aero, whereas the Pure Drive feels a little more raw, hollow, and tinny. So first of all, I just want to say, these are two amazing rackets for the modern player, but I do think the Aero 98 fits that general criteria a little bit better. It shouldn't be too surprising when you look at who's using this frame on the Pro Tour. The fact that it's so complementary to that modern, powerful, spin-friendly ground stroke makes it such a good racket in the right player's hands. Its bread and butter is a massive forehand that requires spin for control, but also a sensation of precision from the string bed, and for that one particular shot, it is better than the Pure Drive. Also, all these aerodynamic properties that are primarily there to help with spin end up making this racket so quick and maneuverable for any type of motion. It feels like you can create a little bit more out of nothing when you're scrambling around the court, and of course, that maneuverability makes it such a good racket for quick reactive volleys at the net. There is one specific player who will prefer the Pure Drive 98 though, and that's aggressive baseliners who like taking the ball early and dictating play that way. It's players like Federer, and it's kind of crazy to say this, and I am going to trigger a lot of purists with this comment, but this is kind of like a super modern version of the Pro Staff in some ways. The Pro Staff has always had a bit more of that dictatey type of power compared to its competition, and while the feel is very different on the Pure Drive 98, it's a similar type of thing where this has so much more power compared to other players' rackets. This is probably the best racket in the world if you want to go for aggressive serve +1 points. Just trust me, add that weight. It's needed to get the right amount of stability and solidity. Overall though, these are two phenomenal sticks, very unique in a world full of more traditional 98s, and Babolat always seems to do a very good job of fusing two conflicting worlds together. On the Aero, it's that perfect marriage of spin and control. On the Pure Drive, it's more power and control. You just have to figure out which suits your game better. With that said though, that is going to be the end of this video. Thank you so much for watching, and remember that if you do want to demo either of these two rackets, you can come visit us in store, or you can check them out online at racketsandrunners.ca.